Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Lighthouse Sessions. I'm really excited. I have my good friend Hamish Knox with me here today. Hamish, why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Thanks for having me, Jeff. So, Hamish, I run Sandler Calgary. So, I'm part of Sandler, which is the largest leadership and sales development company in the world. And at Sandler Calgary, we support our clients to sustainably scale their sales so they can eventually exit for their number, not the number they're told to take.
I love it. Now, we're going to talk about a whole bunch of things, but I want to rewind and in the risk of sounding like I'm asking a really obvious question, how does sales tie into the exit number?
It is a really good question because it is often the forgotten part. And so ultimately, when someone is buying a business, and I've been told this by multiple brokers, right? So this isn't just Hamish's opinion. This is the opinion of multiple business brokers. When someone is buying a business, what they're essentially buying is future cash flows. And what a lot of entrepreneurial businesses especially are is a bottleneck. And it's the founder, the entrepreneur, even though they might have a sales leader, they might have built out a sales team, they're still the bottleneck. And if they're not, there's still unlikely processes and structure so that we could pop Jeff out, we could pop Josh in, and then the business can continue to grow and scale once Josh is taken over and Jeff is exited. And this is also where the dreaded earn out comes in, because most sales, especially in professional services, or if there is not the documentation and the processes in place, there's an earnout. And I've heard from plenty of entrepreneurs and individuals who support them that earnouts suck. And so when we have the revenue engine built like a series of interchangeable plastic blocks, we can pop the current owner out, we can pop the new owner in. Yeah, the gears take a second to re-engage, but then that new owner can grow and scale so that they can eventually have their desired exit.
Awesome. And I think one thing I would point out, and I've seen this time and time again with businesses, is when you're busy doing the sales, you're not focusing on the other aspects of the business that need your attention.
Amen.
Now, when you and I first met, and it's been a while, Sandler was, I think, in fact, called Sandler Sales Training, or maybe that's just what Jeff's brain remembers. But I love that you've now talk a lot more about the leadership piece of it. And again, if you're busy being the one who has to close the deals, you're not building your leadership team. What would you say to that?
110% accurate. And so most people know Sandler for sales. And ultimately, Sandler's really two buckets. Bucket one is more effective human to human interactions, professionally and personally. So are there human beings interacting, whether that's we're talking about hiring, we're talking about coaching, we're talking about accountability, we're talking about strategic planning, or we're talking about interacting with clients or prospects. Sandler provides some kind of support. We've got tools and resources for that. And then the other big bucket is, how do you create that consistent, repeatable, sustainably scalable revenue engine for your organization? And yes, when a founder and an entrepreneur, especially, and this does happen with professional executives, CEOs and whatnot, that they're so hyper focused on the being in, they're not doing the on stuff. And I know that's a bit of a cliche. What ultimately it manifests is, as you pointed out, they're not developing their leaders. And so they might have inherited a leadership team, or maybe they've got a few people who have manager, director, or maybe even vice president, or maybe chief something in their title. However, they're ultimately doers. They're not necessarily real leaders. And that is a really huge detriment, especially when it comes to an exit.
I love that. Now, I believe in the power and the importance of having a sales team. I also believe that salespeople are probably not, can I say the word normal? They're not fun to manage, and they're not, if you've got somebody who's administrative oriented or operations oriented, most leaders know how to manage that. But salespeople are a special breed. Would you agree?
Amen. I would 100% agree, having been a high achieving salesperson before I started Sandler Calgary. Absolutely. And this is the bizarre thing to me is every part of the business, with the exception of sales, and even marketing has got on board with this, in the last 15 years. Every other part of the business has a process. They have systems and structure, right? Like, and you know, if the accounting department comes in and goes, hey, how are we going to account for expenses today? Like, how should we do that? Whereas in sales, it's like, I don't know, like, who do you want to call? And so poor salespeople and poor sales leaders look at structure and process as handcuffs, and they call it micromanagement. And professional sellers and excellent sales leaders look at it as freedom, because essentially we're defining the playing field. Because until we define the playing field and the boundaries and the rules, it's a free-for-all.
Yeah.
And the guy who introduced me to Sandler, his name is Gord. He was my last sales manager. He had 8 sellers on his team, including me. So he had 8 sales languages plus his own to filter through every time we were having a conversation. So we're sitting in a sales meeting and I'm like, oh, I got a hot lead. And is that because I met someone at a networking event and they said, hey, maybe possibly in the future, we'd strongly consider thinking about adding you to our vendor list. And I'm like, got one, right?
Yeah.
Whereas Jeff is like, I don't even consider it like 50% in the CRM until I've got a signed agreement in my hand.
Yeah.
And so creating that common language and defining those boundaries is massively beneficial, not only for the sellers and the sales leader, also for the overall productivity of the organization.
And Hamish, it's actually funny you say that, because back in my day when I was in a sales role, I didn't put something in the CRM until the ink was ready to be signed. And my leaders were always, I had one leader who was very patient and she was like, I know you'll come in. Yeah. But I had another leader who was less confident and he'd ride me every day. He's like, you haven't updated this, you haven't updated that. And I'm like, trust me, I've not missed my quota. I won't miss my quota. But yeah, it's good to know that this is where people are. And to him, he just needed to see, he didn't understand really what, I'm going to be honest, he didn't understand our team.
Sure.
But he'd come in and he'd be like, oh, you got to update the CRM. And it's like, if I'm not doing any activities, why am I here? And, it was just, I felt that working with this leader, it was all about, I wasn't meant to be out talking to people. I was supposed to be sitting in the office working on the CRM. And I'm like, we have different views. I'm going to leave now.
Totally. And that illustrates a great point around structure and process, because when we're working with leaders on CRMs, now whether they have one or they're implementing one, it's creating a common naming scheme and also a no surprises mindset in the funnel. So everybody manages technology differently. And I actually did a CRM implementation off the side of my desk at the company I was before I joined Sandler. And as a leader, I want to be able to have a quick snapshot without bothering my high performers, because, I'm going to get asked by the CEO, the board, the investors, and I don't want to be like, hey, give me 2 days so I can circle to my sales team and find out what's truly going on, because that's not raising my credibility.
Yep.
With my team, if I say, anytime you have had a real commercial conversation with somebody, it goes in the funnel. And then here's how you name it, and here's da-da-da. And then that way, my job gets easier as a leader, and I have much more confidence. And like I had a guest on my former podcast years ago, and they were a sales leader for a publicly traded company. And they beat the estimated performance by a major factor. I think it might have been 3x what the market expected them to do, they did. And at the very next board meeting, they were walking in thinking that they were going to have a parade thrown for them, and they were very close to getting fired.
Yeah.
And they said, and on the podcast, they shared that the lesson they learned that day is the market doesn't like surprises. If the market says you're going to do 6 cents a share, if you do 7, okay, but you better not do 8. And of course, you better not do 5 either. Yeah. But if you're in that like 6.5, great, no problem at all. And so same thing with sellers and sales leaders is we want to have no surprises, because surprises are when things go sideways, whether it's a conversation with the board or all of a sudden you're putting pressure on your delivery team, whatever you call them, to actually deliver and keep these clients long term.
Yeah. And I think that's the piece that is missing is, okay, once we land this deal, we better be able to deliver.
Totally.
Now, I'm going to shift gears slightly because you and I can talk about sales, and we have had many conversations about sales.
Absolutely.
Let's talk about when I met you, and literally it was about 14 years ago, give or take a couple of weeks. I remember saying, you said to me, with absolute certainty, I've figured out what I'm doing with the rest of my life. And I love that certainty. Now, let's talk to what made you change gears from your past job to, because you were working for someone, and then you said, I'm going to take on and launch my own franchise.
Absolutely. So I had already had a side hustle, if you will, which actually wasn't going anywhere, but I was meeting, it was inspired by a couple of my clients, Bev and Trevor. I'll give them a shout out. And they were partners in a public relations firm. And we were doing our quarterly review meeting, and they said, we'd really love to be able to do what you do. And I said, first of all, define what it is you think I do. And because I'd like to find out whether or not this is insulting. And they said, well, like, if you want us to call up the business editor at a newspaper and say, hey, we've got a client, they've built this thing, how about you do a story on them? We can do that all day long. But if you want us to call up the CEO of some company and be like, want some PR? Like, we can't do that. So entrepreneur brain goes, oh, maybe an opportunity here. And then I was actually in Montreal for meetings with Gord, and Gord lives in Vancouver. And we randomly decided to have dinner at the same Portuguese restaurant. So I walked in and said, table for one. They said, go sit at the bar, loser, or something in French. And Gord was there, and I'm sharing with him what I've been doing. And he stops me and he says, have you ever heard of Sandler? And I said, nope. And he says, it's really how you think and talk and act. And I said, thanks, I think. And then that night I couldn't sleep. So I did some Googling, and I found an article by my colleague, Bill Bartlett, who was out of Chicago until he retired a couple of years ago. And it was like I walked into a church and God spoke to me. And it was literally because I get very frustrated at the nonsense that occurs when two human beings are communicating. Like, I don't understand why we have to build up, euphemisms and obfuscate what we actually mean, especially in North America. We have this, as George Carlin said, we have this soft language that takes the life out of life. And so Sandler was about restoring the life to my interactions, whether it was personally or professionally. And I've been recruited several times to run sales teams since I started my business. Hasn't happened recently because those people finally got the message that, like, you could become my client, I'm not going to become your employee. And even though that I have shifted my go-to-market plans, and I certainly have other things that I am involved in, ultimately, Sandler allows me to live what the Japanese call ikigai. And, my ikigai is to support as many sales leaders, which include entrepreneurs and sellers, to reach their goals, and to, for the entrepreneur, eventually exit for their number, not the number they're told to take.
I love that. Now, I'm going to address something in regards to the entrepreneurs, because I think it's important. A lot of people question whether systems like Sandler work for entrepreneurs. And, I'll go so far. When I first heard about Sandler and also the EOS, I was like, why would you do that to me? And then I realized, wait a minute, it's something I'm doing for myself. And so I want to talk about, first of all, I want to acknowledge that you are, in fact, an entrepreneur. And I want to point out that you are free-thinking, you're very intelligent, and you have very big ideas, and you find great comfort in the Sandler system.
So, it comes down to structure, Jeff, like you were talking about, right? And so entrepreneurs, free thinking is great. Being visionary is great, except eventually you have to do something. Right. And there are plenty of people, and we've met them all, and they're usually at networking events, who have these grand ideas and they never execute on them. They never take action. And that's the really critical thing that I feel separates the successful entrepreneurs from everybody else, is the willingness to proactively is key, proactively take action within the bounds of a structure, because what structures give us is an accelerant. And when people look at structures as handcuffs, they're minimizing their own success. We have a road system in Canada, right? We have roads. And roads are a system. They are a structure from driving from point A to point B. And what they do is they accelerate our way of getting there. And there's plenty of, we've been to other countries around the world where they don't necessarily have that kind of structure, and things get done. They don't necessarily get done as efficiently as they could. And there's plenty of examples in Canada of things that we don't have that other countries have that makes us less effective than we could be at certain things. So this is not a slag on Canada's the greatest country in the world. This is an example of, we have a road system that allows us to get from point A to point B significantly more effectively than any other way. And the same thing with sales, and especially leadership, because no one ever goes to school for sales. And I appreciate that there are sales degrees out there, especially in the US. They're okay. At least there's something. Yep. No one ever gets taught how to be a leader. And then all of a sudden you're an entrepreneur and you hire your first person. It's like, I don't know, you figure it out. Okay, well, that's a cycle of turnover that we've seen way too many times. So how do we create structures around leading our people so they can actually do the job we hired them for, which if we're going to step in and do it, we don't need them.
Yeah. I love that. And I do love the analogy of the road system, because, again, I've been a tourist in other countries, and, I've driven in countries where they're on the opposite side of the road. And it's like, I'm a hazard because I don't know the rules.
Right.
And I'm less likely to get where I need to go efficiently. So I love that. Now, I feel from our past conversations, you when you told your mom that you were starting Sandler and going into sales, I feel like you didn't say, "Hey, Mom, I'm going to start a sales company." What did you tell your mom?
Well, so there are no entrepreneurs on either side of my family. And there's a bit of a cliche out there, and it's in several books and articles and whatnot, about how, the parent's child goes into sales, and they don't want to say that. So they say that they're in marketing, or they say that they're in business development, or whatever other euphemism sounds better than sales. Well, my parents were so terrified that I wasn't going to get a paycheck every 2 weeks. They could say I was in sales. They could tell their friends that I was a salesperson, because at least to them, I was making money. Entrepreneurs don't necessarily make money in their world, so they were terrified of that. I think after 14 years, they've come to understand that I've done okay for myself, and I'm able to support not only myself but my daughters as well. However, because of my family background, I find it very amusing that they were comfortable saying that I was a salesperson, because in their mind, at least I was still going to be able to make money.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, my dad would tell people I was unemployed, and I'm like, Dad. And the funny thing is, my entire family, we come from a long line of farmers, and I'm like, farmers are self-employed, but yeah, to my father, I wasn't a farmer, and I didn't work in an office, therefore I was unemployed.
Gotcha.
And I proudly say now I'm unemployable, but that's a different conversation.
Me too.
So let's talk about, somebody is watching this and they say, I really like this Hamish guy. And for anybody watching, we are friends. Hamish and I go way back. What does working with you look like? Because I know a lot of people are like, oh, I'm too old to go back to school, or I don't want to get the textbooks. Let's talk about your process of, what does it look like?
Yeah, and I appreciate you asking. And as our videos say, it's demanding, expensive, and a big commitment, and it works. And usually when I get calls like, I hear it's expensive. I'm like, yeah, what does it say after that? I don't remember. Okay, we're not a good fit, because if you stopped at expensive, you're not looking at this as an investment. So ultimately, we're really easy to work with, and we follow a process, which is what we teach our clients to do. So we typically have an initial, say, 25-minute or less video call to get to know each other, understand, is there a thing here? Is there something that we could build on? If we do, we move over to a 90-minute scoping call where we draw out exactly the who's and the when's and the whys of how we're going to start working together from a crawl, walk, run approach. So, there's plenty of consultants and coaches out there who essentially come in and go, hey, whatever you've been doing to now, get rid of it, because you're going to do my stuff. And I think that's gross. And if there's those coaches and consultants out there who are like, I don't do that, it doesn't matter what we say, it matters what they hear.
Yes.
And that's what we're saying. Now with Sandler, we spend a lot of time up front understanding what makes our clients awesome. Like, how did they get to wherever they're at now? So then we can layer on our stuff on top of it and make them even more awesome. And that's where that scoping call comes in. Once we go beyond that, most of our work is in our collaborative sessions. We get a bunch of different people from a bunch of different companies in the same session, whether it's sales, leadership management, or executives. All our clients discover they have the same problems. They just call them different things. We also include private executive coaching, sales process advisory, opportunity review and management internally, access to our LMS, as well as we will take two members of our client team. Typically, those are the executives down to the Sandler Summit in Florida every year, so they can get connected to the wider community of organizations who are leveraging Sandler to sustainably scale their sales. Globally, our average client works with us for 9 years. We have one client which will be 13 years this coming December, and we've got two clients who will be 12 and 11 years respectively as of August. So our clients tend to stick with us for a very long time because we start working with them where they're at to help get them where they want to be, not where we think they should be. And then we're meeting with them every quarter to track progress. And eventually we're going to say, hey, you want to keep climbing together? And usually the answer is yes, because their vision has expanded and the mountaintops that they want to reach have gone higher, and they trust us to support them and their teams.
I love that. And by the way, most entrepreneurs, they climb a mountain and go, oh, crap, there's a taller one. So
I have a client, actually, it's this client who will be 13 years with me in December. And when we started working together, they said, I am a CEO salesperson. I said, what the hell does that mean? And they said, and they run an IT company, and they said, I'll have as many techs, marketing, admin, I do the sales. And literally 2 years to the day where we had that conversation, they called me up and said, I need your help hiring a salesperson. And I literally said, why would you do a dumb thing like that? And they said, well, thanks to working with you, my goals have gotten bigger. And I've realized the only way to achieve these bigger goals is I'm going to need someone else to help me with the sales side. And, that was 12 years ago that we had that conversation, and we're still working with them.
I love it. Now, I'm going to say something imperfectly. I want you to refine it. But what I'm hearing in this, and this is what I understand of what you do, a lot of training is I go away, somebody goes off to a conference, they learn something, they come back and hope that it sticks. Yeah. I know you do a lot more cohesive and team related. Is that a fair statement?
It is a fair statement. And so Sandler is built around the adult learning model, which is ongoing reinforcement over time. So typically, as you said, it's people go to an event, whatever that event is, and that event has an end period, right? Whether it's half a day, 1 day, 1 hour, doesn't matter. It's an event. Yeah. And as someone once said to me who had experienced that and then started working with me, they peel back your head, they put their funnel of information in, and then they say, okay, we're done with you. Go back out and play. And actually, Harvard published a study several years ago that showed 90% of what is learned at a one-day event is forgotten in 30 days because it's not implemented. And I will modify the statement that I say to make it a little bit more less explicit. All my stuff works if it's implemented. And so with my clients and former clients say, well, it's not really working. We like you guys, but it's just not really working. It's code for they're not implementing. And we're doing the hardest thing we can do, which is adjust people's behavior. And especially at that leadership management level where they got to a certain level and typically they got in a comfort zone. And now I'm challenging that comfort zone. And even the top level sellers, I'm challenging their comfort zones, which, even I shared with you before we started recording, like I had my comfort zone challenge today and I didn't feel very good about it. Now I use that as motivation, and I've got some plans in place to move forward based on that comfort zone challenge. So ultimately it's ongoing reinforcement. We thin slice something at the end of every session, whether it's a public or where it's collaborative or it's private. Our clients have to log in what were their aha moments, and they make an implementation commitment. Then the next time we get together, we review those commitments, what worked, what doesn't, because nothing's going to work 100% of the time, especially when you're interacting with humans. And then we iterate on it, and they go back out, they make another commitment to continue implementing and grow and scale from there.
I love that. And I think, for me, it's recognizing that learning curve, because I've been to those conferences. You get back and, all it takes is one bad flight or one missed flight. And then you're like,
yeah,
I don't remember what I learned.
Or you have a notebook like this thick,
Yeah.
right? An inch thick, like, oh, this is great. Oh, this is great. I'm going to, and you get back to your desk like, Jeff, I'm so glad you're back. This happened while you're away, and this happened while you're away, and this happened while you're away. And you're like, notebook, shelf, and never.
Yeah. And that's the thing. I think we as humans, and this applies to most things in life. What we practice is what and how we practice is what we become.
Mm-hmm.
And I do love that you're challenging people's comfort zones, because
Totally.
If it was comfortable, we're clearly not learning.
Exactly.
Now, you talked about who you work with. Let's describe that person, because I don't want somebody to waste their time if they're not a fit.
Totally.
What is a good fit for you?
Yeah, so I appreciate you asking that. So ultimately, it is going to be an entrepreneur or a chief executive, because professional executives, if you're working for a private equity firm, venture capital firm, you're doing at least 5 million in revenue. Now, 5 million is wherever you're based. If you're listening to this in Germany, it's 5 million euros in turnover, right? So 5 million. And you can see at least $1 million or $1 million in annual revenue growth. Again, million euros, million pounds, whatever. You can see it, you believe it's capable, just not necessarily sure how to get there. And you are willing and able to have you and your team collectively invest somewhere between 80 and 100 hours over the next year, right? So bad at math, but at the extreme end, that's going to work out to like 2 hours a week, which I think most people can find a meeting that could have been an email that they could instead put into a development session in. And our floor for an engagement, and it's the floors go up, is 20,000 a month in local currency. And so if you're thinking of, I can see at least $1 million and I'm willing and able to invest $250,000 to get $1 million. And of course, the world doesn't end. We're going to keep growing and scaling from there, and growth isn't linear. Those are the individuals that are best fit for working with Sandler Calgary, because especially for that entrepreneur, your payoff on the exit is going to be massive. And we had a client last year share our sales leadership summit in person, which is coming up again October 30th in Calgary, that they exited their business in 4 years instead of 6 at a 1,200% multiple to what they bought it for. Wow. Thanks to the work that they got the support they got from us.
And you said your tagline, sorry, it's expensive,
demanding, expensive, and a big commitment. And it works.
There you go. All right. Now, last question. Well, a couple last questions. But if somebody's watching this, how can they get in touch with you? How can they take the next step?
Absolutely. So I am the world's #1 Google result for Hamish Knox. I haven't tested if I'm the #1 result for Hamish, but Hamish Knox or Hamish Calgary, you will definitely find me. I'm easy to find on LinkedIn. There's not many Hamish Knoxes, especially in North America. And then also go.sandler.com/Hamish, which is Hamish. Those are the 3 ways that you can get in touch with me. And then click the contact us or DM me on LinkedIn. I'll send you a link to book that 25-minute conversation, and we'll rock and roll from there.
Awesome. Now let's go back in time to when you started with Sandler. Mm-hmm. What advice do you wish you had then that you have now that you would give to somebody?
So I would certainly say sleep on it. And, there's a Sandler phrase of never take a think it over. Well, some people need to sleep on things, right? That's just the way their brains work. And like, I am a very quick decision maker. I'm a driven, you and I are both driven individuals. And I would just like, yes, I'm going to do that. Yes, I'm going to do that. And I have learned through pain that slowing down to speed up is very, very powerful. The other thing I would say, and I learned this from Dr. Benjamin Hardy, is to raise my floor. And especially early on, and all entrepreneurs do this, is they say yes to almost everything, right? Hey, can you come speak at my, my meetup group of cross-eyed left-handed dentists? Like, absolutely. Yeah, sounds like a great idea. maybe possibly one of those could maybe give me a little bit of money and be my client, right?
Yeah.
And so it would be establish a floor earlier. And what I have learned since I started using the word floor, way more credibility.
Yeah.
Because all of a sudden I am someone to be taken seriously, and especially in the entrepreneurial world, when someone's like, hey, so what's an engagement look like? And someone says, well, it's going to depend on a bunch of things. Credibility goes through the floor, to keep using that phrase. When I say, hey, our floor for an engagement is this number of hours or this dollars or, this number of people or whatever, automatically we are someone to be dealt with, and our credibility goes up massively.
I love it. Well, Hamish, I want to thank you. You've been a guest on previous podcasts. I want to thank you, as always, for coming and sharing your story with me.
Thank you for having me, Jeff. Take care.